Alright, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to be learning about oil patterns and how oil patterns changes your ball motion. I feel like in a lot of videos they don't explain it very well, so hopefully I can break it down better so that you can better understand it at home. Alright, welcome back. We are learning about oil patterns today. And so a few points here that I'm going to cover is oil patterns will dictate how your ball is able to move. There's more forgiving patterns, and then the next step up is recreational patterns, sport patterns, and then what I would call professional patterns. And so there's a lot of different styles of oil patterns, and basically if you look at the oil pattern sheet, you'll have a graph and it'll have a lot of numbers on there, but it's more or less when you think about the oil and you think about the oil machine, it's laying the pattern down just like a inkjet printer would if you print out whatever you print out. And so the thing is going back and forth as it goes down the lane. It's more or less laying the oil down at a certain volume and a certain shape as it goes down the lane. And so what you have to do is adjust your game based on what that oil pattern is. And then what you do is you match your game to the pattern or to the condition. And so it's very hard to do, it's very hard to learn, but if you're going to be bowling at a professional level, that is something that you have to work on and learn and get better at every single time you go practice. So in today's video, we're just going to cover a few of those patterns, and that way you can better understand what I'm talking about. This is a house pattern, and if you bowl on a league, if you bowl heck in high school or youth bowling, this is normally what you bowl on all the time. And what this pattern is meant to do, it's meant to help you. It's meant to have built-in margin for error. So on a pattern like this, you will have a lot of margin for error. And really, the numbers that you want to look at is always the ratio. So the ratio is a 12-to-1. And if it's a 12-to-1 ratio, that means you got a lot of margin for error. And so as you can see, the shape of this pattern is there's a lot of friction here, a lot of friction here. And where your built-in oil is, it's all in the center. And so what you can see, this is a raised version of it. And so you can see how much oil there is here and how little there is on the edges. So keep that in mind when you look at these oil graphs, because this will tell you how you need to play the pattern. And whereas this one, if I can erase this, where you see I circled the 12-to-1 ratio, but what also you need to look at is the distance. Because if you do the minus 31 rule, and if you don't know at home what it is, you will take the distance, which is 43 feet, minus 31, and then you will get 12. And the reason why you do that minus 31 rule is that will tell you about down lane. So if we're going to circle, let's see here, board 12, this is going to be your break point, about right here. And the reason why you do that math is it gives you a good idea of what it is. So basically how the rule works, in case you don't know at home, is you take the pattern distance minus 31 every single time. It's always minus 31. And then that will give you your break point. So your break point is now at 12, so that's a good starting point of what your target should be down lane. And so that's the next number, it's the ratio and the distance. Now the drop brush, the tanks, all that, a lot of times it may matter if you know your numbers, but more or less when you're starting out, you just need to know the basics of that pattern, which is the distance, the ratio, and the volume. The volume is a key number because it tells you how much oil there is on the lane. And so to me, when I look at it, if I see that it's 25 mils, which in bowling, if you don't know that either, we will always say mils instead of milliliters because milliliters is a long word. And so just like in anything, in order to shorten it down, bowlers will say mils instead of milliliters because it's quicker and it's easier to say. So if I look at 25 mils, I'm seeing that that's a low volume pattern. And so a lot of times if I can, let's see here, if it's 25 to 28 mils, then normally that's a low volume pattern. Once you get above 28 and you get into, let's say, 29 and up, that's a high volume pattern. So anytime you see anything less than 29 mils, that tells you it's going to be a low volume, which means it'll create more friction sooner and the pattern will break down. And so the pattern will then dry out, which will then normally in turn force you to move left if you're right-handed or force you to move right if you're left-handed. Now, so the next pattern to me would be a step up. So this is a step up simply because, why is that? If I can mark here, all right, so this is 42 feet with this one. So at the 42 minus 31, do the math at home, that puts you at board 11. So if it puts you at board 11, that means your target will be about right here at the break point. And then if your ratio is 6-1, what was the ratio on the house pattern? It was 12-1. So this means there's a lot less margin for error. Which to me, this is a recreational pattern. It's still easier, but it's not as easy as a house pattern, but it's still an easy pattern to bowl on, just simply because why? There's so much friction built in on both sides. So it's clear on how you want to play the pattern. You want to get to the friction and then let the ball come back to the pocket. Only difference is, as you can see, it plays more flatter in the center, which to me, if you're a low rep player, most likely you're going to ride the edge and then just let it come back to the pocket. So that's the difference, is when you look at the ratio, that tells you how hard the pattern is. So the closer that number is to 1, the harder the pattern is going to be. So the hardest patterns will be a 1-to-1 ratio. The easiest will be like the house pattern, a 12-to-1 ratio. Whereas this one, this is a 6-to-1. 6-to-1, it's easier than a house pattern, but still not a hard pattern. It's more of like a middle time frame there, or like a middle range of the hardness scale in my mind. So, but also it's low volume. So anytime it's low volume, who's going to struggle? It's the players that are high rev, that have a lot of power, that are two-handers, and they like to shape it. And so what happens is they get farther and farther left super quick. And when that happens is they run out of room quick, so then they start lofting it, which will then in turn make it a lot harder to bowl on. Whereas the low rev guys, they don't really have to do too much. The friction is already built into the pattern, so it makes it a lot easier for them to bowl on that pattern, but it makes it a lot harder for two-handers or high rev one-handers. All right, this is the step up. This is what I would call a sport pattern, something that's harder. This simply because the ratio is a 4-to-1 and it's 45 feet. So anytime you have a longer pattern and it's a lower ratio, that means to me they're going to have less margin for error, but in turn it is a little easier than a professional pattern, than a US Open pattern, because it's not as flat, and you do have some friction built in here, so you can shape it, and it's a lot easier to shape it as the pattern breaks down. Um, but yeah, it's a lot harder. But here's the difference: the mills are very low. It's 23 mills, and so when you see that again, like I was saying on the other pattern, two-handers are going to struggle if they're not able to tone down their revs and rotation and stay up the back of the ball. Then they're going to have a tough time with this pattern because it's going to break down very quick. Even though it's longer, it's going to break down quick, which means they're going to have to get left early, which will then in turn create a lot of issues as the transition moves on. All right, this is the last pattern here. This is the hardest pattern. This is when you really get into some hard territory here. This is really what you try to avoid at all costs. But this is why the US Open is so hard, is because they have patterns like this and they always want to mess with you. So this is the case. Look at this. This is a 1-to-1 ratio. It's 45 feet. It's 27 mils. So when you see that, and you see that this is a super flat pattern, which means what? It's solid. There's no forgiveness built into it. There's no built-in friction on the edges. What it is, this is a heavy concentration of oil here, and it's a light concentration of oil here. So what that means is, how you play these patterns is you play more straight up, you play more up the back of the ball. This to keep it more end over end, so that way you're not putting too much rotation on it, because when you do that, then that creates inconsistencies when you bowl on these patterns. So really what you want to do is you want to be super straight on these patterns and with less hook. And that's how you bowl these patterns, is because if you were to try to hook it at a big angle like this, what's going to happen is you'll have one that hits the pocket, one that goes here, one that goes here, one that goes here, one that goes here, one that goes here. This simply because your rotation is so critical, your tilt is so critical, that if it's off just by a little bit, that will create a little different motion down lane, which will then in turn create all these different angles toward the pocket. And that's why these patterns are super hard. So the straighter you are, normally the better you are on these types of patterns, until it breaks down enough to where you can kind of move in, and then you have a built-in friction point, a built-in break point as time goes on. So I hope you understand oil patterns now. I hope you understand how to play these patterns if you ever come up against these in the future. If you have any questions, let me know. But thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.